Square Enix has a long history of redeveloping and republishing their RPGs on different platforms, so it was only a slight surprise when they launched Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition, a stripped down and streamlined version of FF15 for handheld devices. Media coverage of the game was good on release, but owing to the huge success of the original Final Fantasy XV, it seemed that most commentators were very familiar with it. The focus of criticism tended to be on how faithfully and successfully the full game was translated into Pocket Edition. Even reviews which did not overtly discuss Pocket Edition in terms of the original were no doubt coloured by the writer's experience with it. While I consider myself to be a moderate Final Fantasy fan, I have never played 15, as I don't own a suitable console to run it. I haven't seen the film or web series either, so Pocket Edition has been my only experience of Final Fantasy 15, and it's from that standpoint that I'll write this review. I'll be looking at how Pocket Edition fares as a standalone version of FF15 in its own right, as someone who knows next to nothing about the original game. I hope that this will be useful to others who haven't played 15 and are looking to get Pocket Edition, but I will also be interested to see whether my perceptions of Pocket Edition differ from those who have played the full game. In Pocket Edition, players take control of Crown Prince Noctis as he travels the world with his companions Prompto, Gladio and Ignis. The majority of the game is spent exploring relatively small discrete areas, collecting items and fighting monsters while heading towards specific locations to progress the main quest. Combat is in real time, with the player taking direct control over Noctis' movements and attacks. The three companions are almost exclusively controlled by AI, but their special moves can occasionally be activated via on-screen prompts. The combat system is simple, with a single button to attack and another to dodge or parry. There are three separate weapons available for use: the fast-attacking spear, wide-arcing greatsword and balanced longsword. In theory, these separate weapons offer separate technical benefits, but anyone looking to optimise their character is best served by sinking their resources into a single weapon type and foregoing the other two. Magic is an odd state of affairs. Noctis' only use for magic points is to perform a teleport attack, which moves him next to an enemy. It's a fun technique to use, but I was surprised that it was the only one available. Elemental magic spells do not consume MP, but can only be cast by absorbing fire, ice or lightning elements from the world. These elements are in good supply, and Noctis can only carry one such spell at a time, so these are usually unloaded at the start of each fight, if for no other reason than to make room for another spell before the next. Noctis does gain access to a couple more magic abilities late into the game, but they appear so close to the endgame that they hardly see much use at all. Lastly, Noctis has a couple of abilities with long cooldowns that call forth the ghostly royal arms of his ancestors. One of these moves, the Armiger, is hideously overpowered and will take out a serious chunk of any boss's health and obliterate almost anything else. So, fights usually consist of opening with an elemental spell, wailing on enemies while dodging their attacks, then whipping out a royal arm to take down a particularly tough monster. It's pretty simple, but I think that's okay. There's just about enough going on to keep you engaged the whole time, and it's really satisfying cutting through enemies. However, it's also very easy. Most enemies can be dodged or even countered without any effort. The game hands out healing potions like candy, and the player can pause and consume them at any time. What's more, there is almost always a shop available from the menu screen to buy more. If anything, potions become less and less important as the game progresses, and the party grow tougher and learn their own healing abilities. Speaking of character progression, Pocket Edition handles it with a branching skill tree called the Ascension Grid. Gaining levels and completing quests earns ability points, which can be spent to unlock new skills on the grid. The companions can learn a range of new special moves, while Noctis' own skills tend toward augmenting his existing abilities. For example, one allows him to heal while warping, and another adds guaranteed status effects to his elemental spells. The Ascension Grid is much simpler than the Sphere Grid of FF10 or the License Board of 12, but it's still very satisfying to plan out your progression and unlock new skills. In addition to the linear main quest, players can complete a host of side quests to gain additional experience points and other benefits. However, the majority boil down to one of three things: hunting for ingredients to cook recipes, hunting for hidden cactuar statues, or following visual clues to find treasure. In fairness, an awful lot of RPG side quests have the player completing these kinds of activities, but by repeating these boilerplate themes in every area, it gets a bit stale. On the other hand, there are also a number of minigames dispersed throughout the main quest that are surprisingly fun to complete. They do well in breaking up the explore and fight gameplay that occupies the majority of the game, and I think it's great that the developers took the time to program them in. So that's the gameplay in a nutshell. Remarkable in its simplicity, wanting in its level of challenge, but nonetheless satisfying and engaging. But let's be real here, no Final Fantasy will be judged by gameplay alone. Let's talk about Pocket Edition's setting and narrative. As mentioned, the game focuses on Noctis and his companions as they travel through the world. Noctis is prince of a nation called Lucis, which holds a magical crystal given to them by the gods. Lucis is at war with the Empire of Niflheim. Peace talks are underway and Noctis is engaged to Lady Luna Freya, a noble and oracle of one of the city-states annexed to Niflheim. The early stages of the game see Noctis and party making the long journey from the Lucis capital to Altissia where he will be married. A few hours into the game, the Empire attacks Lucis, killing its king and stealing the crystal, and so Noctis's quest becomes to recover the weapons of his ancestors and gain the blessings of the gods so that he can defeat the Empire and retake his kingdom. It's a story that draws on many of the tropes from earlier Final Fantasies: the aggressive empire subjugating weaker nations, the mystical crystal with transformative powers, the young royal determined to restore their throne, and the high priestess with the power to heal the world, to name a few. But for all of these familiar elements, I can't honestly say that I found the story easy to follow. Key plot points such as the history of the gods, the nature of demons, and Lunafreya's role as Oracle were either not explained or explained far too late. I kept up with the main thrust of the story, but couldn't help feel that I was missing out on smaller points. A big departure from previous games is the setting. Final Fantasy has played host to a range of settings, from the conventional fantasy worlds of the earlier games to the dark futures of FF7 and 13. But 15's setting is something we haven't quite seen before. The world is distinctly modern, and in fact distinctly Western. It's a world of motor vehicles, concrete roads, electricity pylons, and fluorescent light. From the Americana truck stop at the beginning of the game, it becomes clear that this is a world distinct from our own, but much closer than we would expect. This was an excellent artistic decision, enabling the narrative to explore concepts that a traditional fantasy setting would not permit. While I can't really call it an urban fantasy, as most of it takes place in the countryside, it shares some of the best qualities of the genre. Urban fantasy has the ability to make the mundane feel mystical, and to highlight the small wonders in our own world. In Pocket Edition's case, the subject is car journeys. Incredibly ordinary and for many of us a daily chore, we nonetheless hold fond memories of travelling by car, whether it's, say, a holiday with family or exploring the country with friends. Pocket Edition evokes these memories best during its on-rails driving segments that connect locations together. During these sequences, the player can sit back and watch the world go by while listening to the four characters bantering away. The scenes work so well in building the player's relation with the characters, and more than that, they had me yearning to take a real car journey with friends. Of course, a big part of the success of these driving sections, and indeed the whole game, lies in the cast of characters. Pocket Edition never feels like a game you are playing alone. The four heroes will constantly be joking around and making remarks while you explore and fight. It's almost like you've got friends sitting next to you on the couch. While the game owes so much to these characters, they're not without their faults. The characters embody simple archetypes: brooding Noctis, tough guy Gladios, intellectual Ignis, and wisecracking playboy Prospero. For the majority of the game, these characters just aren't fleshed out at all. Their backstories are barely explored. There's little character development and no inter-party conflict for the first half of the game. Perhaps the intention was to keep the characters simple so as to be more relatable early on, but even if this is the case, a little depth would have gone a long way. There is one notable exception to this. A couple of really bad things happen at the midpoint of the game, which causes major party tension. The next couple of hours of gameplay are rife with passionate arguments as the party structure breaks down. These bitter scenes feel so real, the drama perfectly capturing the kinds of falling outs that only seem to occur between friends or loved ones. Yet even this is resolved quickly in order to move on to the next story beat. It also doesn't help that the pseudo-chibi art style doesn't allow for any facial movement at all, and body language is also muted. The voice acting is superb and breathes so much life into the characters, but I wonder what nuances I missed out on by not having the dynamic facial movements of the original game. Noctis's companions may add a lot of colour to the narrative, but at its core it's a story all about him. It's a story about his maturing, but it's not really a coming-of-age tale. Rather, his early journey to marry Lunafreya and his later quest to restore the kingdom, are symbolic of his personal development. In the opening scene, we see a sulky Noctis bowing before his father, a tiny figure in a huge palace throne room. The king shows concern that Noctis is not ready to take on the responsibilities of marriage, and that he will rely on his companions to complete his journey. The early chapters see the four travelling through the pastoral countryside of Lucis, snapping photos and completing odd jobs. These sections have the feel of a lad's holiday more than a diplomatic mission, and many of the NPCs acknowledge that the group are as close as brothers. But the constant aggression of the Empire makes getting to Niflheim more and more important, and the jovial nature of the early chapters gradually fades away. Later chapters have a more sober tone, reflecting not only the serious nature of Noctis's mission, but also his growth as a leader, slowly taking on the role of king. And there's a certain bittersweet melancholy that emerges, a longing for the carefree tone set by the earlier chapters. Noctis's story seems to represent the journey that many people in their 20s and 30s make. For many of our generation, the early to mid-20s are characterised by a hunt for a stable place in the world, whether it's working out what to do or breaking into a new career. If you believe marketing companies, millennials also place value on close-knit friendships, travel and unique experience. This is the Noctis of the early chapters, a man uncomfortable in his role as prince, travelling with a tight group of friends. As people get older, focus tends to shift more towards things like long-term relationships, developing a career or starting a family. This is Noctis of the later chapters, ready to step into the role of king and confront the Empire head-on. The two final scenes of the game epitomise the bittersweet nature of this process. In one, Noctis sits triumphantly upon the great throne that he bowed to at the start of the game, Lady Lunafreya by his side. In the other, he sits by a campfire with his companions, for what is by necessity the last time. This stark contrast embodies what is gained and what is lost by maturing as an adult, for better or worse. Whilst most people never have to face up to becoming a monarch, Noctis' journey is nonetheless a touching exploration of a journey that many of us will make. Overall, Pocket Edition's quasi-modern setting is a fantastic backdrop for the story. The narrative is driven by the four main heroes, simple but incredibly charming characters that are only really let down by the wooden animation style of the game. Noctis' quest is both wonderfully fantastical and very relatable, weaving tangible emotion into a tale of magic and gods. Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition has simple game mechanics that are nonetheless satisfying, a two-dimensional cast that are nonetheless endearing, and an unpolished plot that is nonetheless moving. Together, Pocket Edition provided an engaging experience that grabbed my imagination and kept me hooked until the end. It's a captivating game to play and a worthy entry into the Final Fantasy series. But, like Noctis sitting with his companions for the last time, I would have loved just a little bit more. Thanks very much for watching. As I said, I'd really like to hear from anyone who's played the original Final Fantasy XV or Pocket Edition. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. If you'd like to watch any more of my videos or to subscribe to the channel, links are on the screen right now.